please.
Chris Brown.
Here.
Amy Grantham.
Here.
Nancy Hopper.
Present.
Katie Jess.
Here.
John Buggy.
Here.
Rudy Smith.
Here.
Sarah Wheaton.
Pledge of allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible.
You have before you the approval of the minutes. Pleasure of the board. Move to approve. Second. Roll call, please.
Chris Brown.
Aye.
Amy Grantham.
Aye.
Nancy Hopper.
Aye.
Katie Jess.
Aye.
John Buggy.
Aye.
Rudy Smith.
Aye.
Sarah Wheaton.
Next we have agenda, approval of the agenda. Pleasure of the board.
Move to approve.
Second. Roll call, please.
Chris Brown. Aye. Amy Grantham.
Aye.
Nancy Hopper.
Aye.
Katie Jess.
Aye.
John Buggy.
Aye.
Rudy Smith.
Aye.
Sarah Wheaton.
Aye. Okay, next two special presentation. We have Tony Miller and the 25-26 budget.
I hope you've all had a chance to look over the budget that I sent to you. I was just going to re-highlight the items that were used, the assumptions used to come up with the budget. We're looking at a deficit for general fund of $197,603. We do expect to come in under that because there's always unfilled positions and things like that. So that's our conservative. If everything was full employment, that's where we could end up. The state equalization came from, I think it was the May 7th, not May 5th meeting. I looked that up. That's the latest numbers we've gotten from the state of Colorado. We assumed 15 pupil increase, which is pretty moderate. You never know what's going to happen in October. All the other revenue amounts were based on 24-25 revenues. It could go up slightly. We just didn't have any solid information on that, so we just left it flat. Like I said, salaries were budgeted at full employment, and that, but it could, you never know. The cap reserve on page 24 reflects anticipated lease payments to Bank of Colorado for the Pioneer construction based on a $2.2 million. And I'm going to meet with Cameron tomorrow and talk about that and see what our next step is to move forward on that. The insurance reserve, we used part of the beginning fund balance to cover 25-26 because we've over allocated in the past, and so we have a fund balance that we can use. And finally, on the building fund, it was assuming that all the HVAC and leach build will be finished in the next 2 weeks. If that doesn't actually happen, I'll have to adjust the budget in January to cover whatever spills over into this year. So any other questions on budget? Okay.
3A, public comment. Anybody?
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to move on then to reports. We have board. I'm going to report that on June 10th, 11th, and 12th, the State Board of Ed was here, and they were conducting their regular board meeting on the 11th and 12th. I think that what they're kind of doing is just doing a traveling roadshow to different locations across the state instead of staying in Denver and having their meetings. And they had asked for a tour or a presentation, and so did that on the Tuesday afternoon. And so that's going to plop up a little bit. What I did is I kind of did a historical PowerPoint from the beginning of time, from what we knew about Morgan, starting out as Camp Tyler and Camp Wardell and then becoming Fort Morgan. And what my focus was really on is trying to demonstrate the different individuals who have lived in this area. You know, starting with Indians, the pioneers that came through, what the significance of the fort was. It was only in existence for 4 years. I think people think it was here a lot longer than that. And then as time went on, when the German settlers came in to work in the fields, and then the Spanish coming in, the Mexican American, or people coming in and working, and then to where we are now with the African refugees. Went into some of the founders of Fort Morgan, and the impact they had, and some of them, of course, working and establishing scholarships. Even I learned a few little things. One of the things, the big house that Betty Laird had was called the Roediger Mansion, and Mr. Roediger was fluent in German and Russian, and so he worked for the sugar factory when it was formed in 1906, and part of his job was to help those immigrants coming in from Germany, the Volga Germans, into settling in Morgan. A lot of you driven on the DLD, that Denver-Detroit-Lincoln Highway, and so forth, didn't realize that people would camp along that. So there was a lot of old history here in Fort Morgan, and so just kind of wanted to share that, and the impact that a lot of individuals had and so forth. This gentleman here, the other one, it was really funny because I went to the museum to talk to Brian Mack, who was the curator there, and was making sure I had some of my facts correct, and he said, well, that's my 5th generation grandfather, and so it was kind of fun just learning little things like that. It was fun. It's always fun to listen to the board, fun to listen to their agenda. Kate Clatworthy was the first school board president, and so just little things that were fun to glean.
I want to just say, Nancy, congratulations on a really, really great PowerPoint. You just did us all proud. It was so good.
Oh, thank you. Thanks. It was fun. I like history. But yeah, lots of different people, like the Glens, years ago, the Glens, George Glenn served in the legislature, and the Williams Family Scholarship, and we all know about Glenn Miller, but Lewis and Maddie Miller are buried at the cemetery. Glenn Miller is not. Ivo Dyer was a nurse and did a lot of delivery of children, and just lots of fun information about Morgan County. Also talked about Summit Springs. I just want you to know that 2 of those 3 there, I was either a principal or a teacher too. So I'm sure that's why they're so famous. But then we talked about the Rainbow Bridge and the impact that had, and the floods in 35 and 65, and that Morgan County was very dry. And the outlaw, the only marshal that was really shot and killed on duty was chasing after someone with bootleg liquor. And so down at the Manhattan Cafe, which is on the corner of Main Street and Railroad Avenue, the northwest corner was the Manhattan Cafe. Talked about the armory and the German soldiers of war that were held there. Brush had Italian prisoners of war held there. Talked about the big oil booms that came through. So lots and lots of things happened in Morgan County. Next, superintendent report.
That was a really good PowerPoint presentation, and I enjoyed getting to see it when we went through it. So unfortunately, I was not able to be here. I was out of town when the state board was here, but I heard went relatively well. The beginning, it went very well, other than the very beginning. So that's good though. So I don't have much on here other than the COP that we're going to talk about for the project down at Pioneer. I know we talked about using some extra money to do some playgrounds, but it's recently come to my attention that is just about shot. And what they do every so often is they do what they call a turnkey job on it, and they sand it down, surface the whole thing. They can do that 5, 10 times. It's gone. I think we've hit that limit. So part of that money, I would like to at least go on record to say that I think we should consider doing as many playgrounds as we can in it with that high school gym floor. I do know that right now there's some leaking issues at the high school, several buildings across the district. However, starting in 2 weeks, we are getting all of them replaced, all the roofs replaced through a claim that was made a year or 2 ago, and we're just now getting paid out for it. So the company's starting, and hopefully we'll have those leaks fixed, and we'll have, you certainly don't want to put a new gym floor in there unless it the roof is fixed, so, unless you have any other questions for me, that's my report.
Next, Assistant Superintendent of Curriculum Assessment.
Good evening. You do have a discussion item later on the agenda for Lincoln High School's actual and planned measures as an alternative education campus. Those are things that we're required to submit to the state by the end of June. Sorry, I keep pressing this button. Their map, it has to do with their NWA map scores, their returning student rate, and their credit course completion. And they actually fared pretty well in all those categories. Now, how that all equates into their school performance framework will not be seen until probably, late August or September, but we are required to submit those to the state. I did provide you with a little bit of additional data in my report, some NWEA data across all grade levels. It's the district level profile. We are going to be getting a better growth premium report. I should be getting that by the July meeting to share with you. I will say that our data generally at the middle of the year looks stronger than it did at the end of the year. Pretty much across all buildings. I've had a lot of conversations with principals. I will say high school, their first year out the gate with NWA, actually they did really well for growth. And I attribute that to doing a lot of work with goal setting with high school students especially. And so thinking about, Rob and I have had lots of conversations about just goal setting and really thinking about where we're at. So if it's any indication on what CMAS scores look like, it'll be fairly, there's a correlation report on how you can take NWA scores and a Colorado report on where kids usually end up on CMAS. I don't put all the eggs in that basket, to be honest, but I will say that the preliminary CMAS results from the state level, of course, they're all still embargoed, but just high level from the state, they're seeing an increase a little bit in math and pretty flat in ELA. I would say that's pretty similar on our NWEA data. DIBELS, we would expect to see, if we want to really move kids off of read plans, we need to see a little bit more movement out of intensive scores. And there are some schools that did all right. Happy to dig in deeper if you want, but I just wanted to give you a high level. And until we get all of the rest of our data, we do have schools really working on unified improvement plans already. And so high school has done, high school, Pioneer, and Green Acres, we've spent hours with Cindy Ward as our consultant for those buildings on turnaround and priority improvement, as I've shared with you in the past. Really solid conversations about root causes, where we're at, and how we're really gonna, what Cindy says is how we land the years, how we launch the year, how we take off in August. And just a huge kudos, I think, to the admin teams, the high school admin team, Pioneers team, Adriana and Zach have dug really deep, and then Carol, we met last week with Cindy because they just finished their diagnostic review, and there are definitely some themes that have arisen from both Pioneer and Green Acres being in turnaround, and I think a little bit different at the high school, obviously, but we've already been doing a lot of summer work with common formative assessments at the high school. High school teachers have really dug in deep, which is awesome. And that leads to kind of one of the things going into next year is English language arts is up for adoption. And as you know, we've been piloting CKLA, at grades pretty much K-5 across all of our buildings. Minus Columbine, dual immersion looks a little different with their biliteracy pathways. I've only taught a few times CKLA, but what I'm recognizing is our kids are not spending enough time in text. A lot of research says, you need kids in front of the books, like they need to be interacting with text. And after a lot of conversations with Cindy, it started with Cindy and Adriana at Pioneer saying, how do we get kids in text? Because we were only piloting CKLA, we have heard a lot of really good things about McGraw-Hill Wonders. it has come highly recommended to Shelley as like the CLD director. A lot of bigger districts that have a lot of multilingual learners are utilizing Wonders. It reminds me honestly of 25 years ago when I was in the classroom where you have it really nicely laid out for you, but you have level text. Kids are really digging into readers. And if you want to know the truth of looking at our data, we're really not making a ton of strides. And I wouldn't expect to see it probably for 3 to 5 years, but one of the other pieces that I've recognized about CKLA in full transparency is we don't have 90% of our elementary teachers are not traditionally trained. And the materials for CKLA are very hard to navigate, if that makes sense. So if I'm traditionally trained, so if I'm picking up a teacher's manual and trying to decide what are the most important components to teach my kids today, it's hard to navigate. Whereas Wonders is a little more, and I use the word scripted, and some people don't like the word scripted, but it's really nicely laid out for a teacher to not have to like figure out which materials to use first and which materials to use next. And so I just wanted to put it out there. I'm really hoping that Adriana and Carol, we've had a lot of conversations about those teachers transitioning a lot earlier in the adoption cycle, because I want the other buildings to have a chance. But as I've talked to Cindy and I've talked to Rob about it, I've always been as the curriculum person, I like to use one program. However, I think now is the time we really need to get Pioneer and Green Acres really moving the needle on ELA math and all the things, but the writing component's also very strong in Wonders. So I want you to know, I reached out to the company. We've actually been working with sample materials at Pioneer just in May, just on a whim, like let's look at the lesson plan structure, let's look at what materials look like. So I guess questions about Wonders.
Questions about Wonders. I know that the CKL, whatever it is supposed to be heavy in science and social studies content. Does this other program as well?
Yes, and the beauty is that we're seeing a bigger increase of instructional time for social studies and science using Discovery Science at 4th and 5th grade, and then also Studies Weekly. It's the little newspapers that they use weekly in the younger grades. And so yeah, I would say that it's maybe not as heavy in social studies and science. It's a lot of more rich, like just text that kids can interact with. And the vocabulary is huge. And very explicit, whereas, again, I've only taught a few lessons in CKLA in grade 5, but you think about the Frayer model and all these things on how you explicitly teach vocab with student-friendly definitions. It's really nicely laid out in Wonders.
So Rena, you said that some of the teachers were using it. What feedback did you get from them?
So, well, it started with Adriana saying, hey, I want to check this out. Would you support me? Sure, I'll support you. ELA is up for adoption next year. Can you get me some sample materials? Sure, I can get you sample materials. How many do you want? All my teachers want to try it. So we basically got digital access to begin with, and then Adriana has actually done a beautiful job of asking. It's nice when you have the same vendor or like the same person at a company. I've worked with her since I came to the district level, and we're getting names of other Colorado schools that are using it. Adriana has figured out the scope and sequence in a 4-day school week on how to actually fit all of the instructional time in. That's where I think we've been lacking a little bit on the consistency of a schedule of how many minutes each building has, what's our best first instruction, instead of just layering in interventions. And I think that's where I see Wonders really coming in nicely. But yeah, the feedback from teachers is they loved it. Again, they've only really utilized it for like a couple weeks, but.
Yeah, and I'm looking at the DIDLS data, and boy, the importance of early instruction and the validity and fidelity, because if you track, the further up the grades go, there's a lot more red, and that's extremely concerning. And so I've heard mixed feelings about whatever it is, knowledge. Some people like it, some don't. Some have, I've heard on occasion say, well, I don't do that part of it, and so forth, and that goes back to my, so to me, as long as the program is meeting the standards that we're supposed to be doing, and teachers have to get rid of their pet projects and teach to fidelity, I don't care what program it is. Because we've got to get a lot more yellow, green, and blue here and get some of this red, because you can just see the trend. Fourth grade and then fifth grade.
I'll tell you, I joked with Rob last week or a couple weeks ago and saying, could we rename the board policy, not curriculum adoption cycle, but high quality instructional materials? So we get used to having the language of the curriculum is the standards, it doesn't matter, you have to have high quality instructional materials that you can put in teachers' hands and honestly navigate. And until, again, in full transparency, until like April when I went and taught those lessons at Pioneer in a fifth grade room, the teacher, she taught 2 of her blocks and I taught 1 of her blocks, and her and I chose completely different things to focus on, which that was, in my, I was like, whoa. But I agree with you, and so we did get samples K to 5. So actually Tara came over and got the samples to look at for kindergarten for Wonders, just so, just an FYI.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the district piloted or utilized this program this year, but Baker's had that program for the longest because they were early on with it.
The pilot for CKLA,
Yes.
they jumped in first,
Right.
yes, and not every building jumped in kind of at the same time, so yeah.
So on the question I had, so then going back to the data, I don't see a lot of difference in the data. I would think that my concern is they've had a longer time, but their scores aren't any better. And so then I think we need to do the root cause analysis. Is it the program or is it the instruction? Again, because if it's instruction, that's what we need to be addressing, because the rest can come into play.
Yeah, and then to tie into that whole curriculum, instructional materials conversation, just one last little piece is, we're gonna be in our second year of the MTSS grant, and we did meet last week, and we tied out a really solid response to intervention referral form, because we really want to make sure that tier 1 universal instruction and some scaffolded supports are happening before we just launch kids into these other intervention systems. So you're absolutely right. I mean, the data is very telling. This is a tier 1. We've got to really address the high quality rigor, not just for ELA, but if you look at data just generally, we need to really be focused on that for instructional practices. Okay, other questions?
Moving on, we have HR gentleman that's not here tonight, but we do have his report.
Yes.
Want to cover that, or?
You might be mentioning it here, big thanks to Vicki Davis and to Jason, Mr. Frasco, for putting this SAFER grant together. Yeah, we got awarded just under $1.3 million in a SAFER grant in order to get their high-power, basically walkie-talkies. And so they will communicate with our police department, we got like a 5-mile range on them or something. Thanks to those guys for doing it. It's much needed.
Moving along, Chief Financial Officer report.
I don't have any additional items other than the budget, but when you get to discussion item A, I would like to make a couple comments.
Right on to discussion items A, the audit report.
We have an engagement letter this evening from DNC, which is who we used last year. They were phenomenal from my perspective, and we're still paying less than half of what we were paying before. The audit fee went up $2,700, which is minimal for a 1-year jump. So I would like you to strongly consider them as our auditors for this coming
Questions? Okay, moving along. B, Lincoln High School actual and planned measures as an alternative education campus. Thanks. Moving on. Project 24-25.
That's also me. I just actually love that they provide this report to us every year, just about the partnership impact that Just the Dental project has alone for our students. And so they break it up by school, how many kids they've seen, how much basically dental care was provided. So a huge kudos, they sent a nice thank you card. So they do that every year, and I think it's nice to highlight.
I agree, thank you. Moving on, we have D, discussion items for Morgan High School girls softball program. I believe Mr. Edson is here to give us some information as well. Maybe Clint, or maybe it's a duo show.
Hello, everyone. Those of you who don't know me, my name is Greg Edson. I'm the new athletic director at the high school. Very excited to be back in Fort Morgan and to be working with the kids here in the district and the community. And yeah, excited to be here tonight to talk about the possibility of more opportunities for those kids. So I know that there's a lot of stuff in the spreadsheet that I sent out. I worked with BS Ed, who's one of our product vendors, to kind of, all right, we're starting from scratch, you know, what's it gonna take to start up a program? I'm sure there's some things in there that you might have questions about, but essentially everything there is what would be needed to get us up and running with the softball program. I know that there's a lot of questions surrounding the program, so I'm happy to answer any of those from my perspective tonight. I would say, before we dig in, you know, I would like to kind of know what the board's intentions are. You know, are we trying to start a team for the high school, or are we trying to build a program for the high school? Because I feel like those are two different things when we talk about longevity. We want to make sure that what we do is not just sustainable, but it's something that's promoting that program, not just in the high school, but also, you know, all the way down to the youth level. So I'd be happy to kind of get your direction on what your vision is for that as we talk about the opportunity to open up some things.
Ask John to speak first because I guess he's worked with previously at the high school and the previous director that we had. And so I think I'll let him kind of start, and then I know we have other board members that have some specific questions too. Thank you.
Sounds good.
Yeah, thanks, Nancy, happy to start. So I think, right, team versus a program, and I think what we're really looking at is starting the program. And, you know, we have some feeder teams already in the area with Havoc, and we also have softball teams in the Wiggins area. And so really, we're looking at building that program out, but giving them an opportunity for a high school level. I know I've talked to two girls that I know that are now Rush students because they moved there, they located to there so that they would get the opportunity to play. I know a lot of girls in the area that sports or don't play sports in the fall and wait till the spring till the club team starts so that they can get an opportunity to play. So I think it's something that you know, used to have it. I was looking back, and Clint, you may know, was it 2014, 2015 was the last softball team we had?
I believe it was like 2007.
Okay.
Scott Miller was the last coach.
Okay, so I know that it was the program was decent, but the numbers were favored. They were in Rush as well, and they made the decision to combine those programs so that they could keep a program. Since that time, Rush has recovered a lot, and we don't, to the best of my knowledge, and Clint, you correct me if I'm wrong, I think we only have one or two Fort Morgan students that are now going to Rush to play.
I think it's one.
Yeah, and I know we had more, but some of them transferred schools to Rush to play, so that they would get another in my discussions with your predecessor, we talked about the February timeline to get into starting the high school program back with CHASA, and I think that there's some great opportunities. I know there's been some questions about, would we be competitive, and I know that it's going to take some time to build a team. However, some of those teams that we're competing against, I went and looked and won a game in 2 years. So some of those teams are in the same struggles, and so it's always not necessarily, it's the cycle of athletes that you get to. But I know some of the competitive teams we have here in the area that would be coming into the high school are very competitive right now.
Are
So-
those teams made up of just Fort Morgan kids, or are they students from surrounding areas?
So my understanding, in speaking with the coaches after they came in the last meeting, not quite half of the team is from Fort Morgan. The rest fill in from Higgins, Moldona. There are a couple of Russian Sterling girls there, but they fill in. Mainly it's going to be Fort Morgan, Wiggins, and Moldona. Where the majority of the kids are coming from. In speaking to some of those coaches that have Wiggins students, we actually are very hopeful that we get this program because their options are to go to Brush or go to Blount Central, and pretty much the majority of those students that are playing competitive softball don't do either. So they just sit out. And I hate to see girls lose out on an opportunity, especially when there's a number of girls out there that play softball that are really good, and I think could really represent the high school. Again, it's, there's a lot of logistics that go into that, as I'm sure you know, but I know some of those club teams are already playing at Riverside A&B. I've talked to the superintendent, we have an MOU with the city, so we just have to work out those logistics. And I know you put down here on the list, purchasing bats and helmets and stuff, and it's kind of like baseball. A lot of those girls already have their own equipment. They go out and spend it, but building out the team, we certainly understand that as well.
Well, and my piece of that is if we do have a program, we want to make sure we outfit that program, right? We don't want them without the opportunity to be successful because we're trying to scrape together the used equipment or whatever we can find for them. If we do have a program, we want it to be something that not only the kids can take a lot of pride in, but the community can take a lot of pride in. Facilities are definitely part of that. Equipment is definitely part of that. If you have to start from scratch, everything from the jugs machines, the hitting machines, to those types of practice pieces that you really need in order to give the kids an opportunity to be successful, I think are pretty important parts to have in place to get things started.
So when, I mean, interrupt here, when I originally talked to Mr. Edson about this, is one of the things, one of the provisions of Title IX is that it's not just about your numbers balancing out, it's about having adequate and equivalent facilities for both boys and girls. So if you have a boys baseball team, the girls softball team has to have access to the same equipment, same type of facility, same type, so that's why we need to look at whether or not they have a bat or not. We have to provide some, we have to have helmets, we have to have all those things that jugs machines, batters, or pitcher, pitching stuff, all that, batting cage, things like that. I think that would probably be a portable one.
Yeah, and there's options. Some of these things have values next to them or quantities next to them. Some of them had zeros. So when I priced everything out, I asked for a couple of options on things, and I'm sure there's things that aren't on this list that we would probably need over time as well. I wasn't sure, obviously at middle of June, trying to find a schedule would be my biggest concern. Just a short time frame, we're 8 weeks away from the start of fall sports, and being able to build that out, to build it out not only where it's competitive for the kids, but there's value in it as well, would be at this stage of the game pretty difficult. even at a JV level, to try to find enough games against teams that we could be competitive with to get things started. My other concern, I guess, is that I know that there was a survey sent out this spring gauging interest. Gauging interest and getting a kid to sign on the dotted line, would be another concern for getting things up and running right away. What would that commitment level be? If it's something that, again, to me, if we're gonna build a program, we go down 2 levels and we start working with the city. And I know that they do have softball coming back this summer, I saw. I'd be curious to see, what the participation's like and the interest is at that level. And then work with those club teams to develop that local club where those girls to get familiar with the game, or, it's a lot easier to learn the game when you have those opportunities outside of the high school season. When it comes time for the high school season, those are girls that have been playing all summer that are primed and ready to go. If we're entering, with 3/4 of the team at the entry level, trying to build momentum for that program, it takes success. And, if we're building from the floor up, I feel like that would be a better option than just putting a team out there and saying, good luck, ladies, we're here to support you. And so I think that there's some deep conversations that we can definitely get into with, the best way to build a program. And that's why I asked, we can get a team together for sure. But if we truly want to build something that's here for a long time and sustainable, I think we need to take that holistic approach to how we go about it.
Anybody else have a question?
I have some things. So is the goal for the action item tonight to start the season in August of 2025?
Honestly, I wasn't sure where the board was gonna go with it. So in the conversation, we're either gonna have to make some movement on it, whether we vote to pass it for August, vote to pass it for next fall, vote to not pass it, vote to table it, but there's gotta be some kind of action somewhere that says we discussed it and now we're going to either vote on it tonight or we're going, and what that vote looks like is up to whatever the board decides based on the conversation tonight.
Mr. Edson, you did a fantastic job with the Excel spreadsheet. I am a fellow Excel user, so it looks great. Has that number been built into the 25-26 budget? It has not. Okay.
So if we do vote to do this, I'm gonna have to change the budget, I'll have to have a special meeting to add it to that. So
Sure.
just-
And would you throw that number out publicly, so that, I mean, my understanding was roughly 40,
Yeah, 38,000.
looking at about a $40,000 startup would be the potential. The other question I have too is, you said 8 weeks, but my understanding is if we were to move forward with this, we would need to have somebody lined up to begin practices in 2 weeks or so.
It would sure be nice to have some pre-season opportunities for the girls and again, to gauge numbers, to gauge interest, to gauge commitment. That's, we're a little behind the 8 ball.
And tell me when the timeline is, that if we were to move forward with something like this, according to CHASA's guidelines, when is that scheduled? If we were going forward, that should have been, we should have had things done in February?
February, yeah, and that's a little late, I think, this is definitely something to dig into, because we would have to find a league, what league would we play in? Would that league accept us for softball only? Is that something we can get in the Patriot League for? And if that's the case, the numbers change, we have a new cycle coming after next season, because we'll be in the Patriot League next year and a different league the following year. There's a lot of logistical things, that, we don't have answers for yet.
Okay, I'm gonna go to this side. Sarah, any questions? Chris?
I guess I'd just like to know what your feeling is. Should we start in August or should we wait till the next season?
Well, I'm technically not an employee yet. I'll be honest with you, it feels rushed to try to do this by August, it really does. I don't think that the program would have an opportunity to get its feet underneath it before it. I think we need to have some parent meetings and have some input from those parents and those students that are gonna be involved in the program. And again, work to really build that program, starting at that middle school or even younger age. I mean, there's a lot of skills that are necessary for softball, just like baseball, that you have to develop, that there's a growth every single year when it comes time to develop those skills. And again, to be competitive and to field a team that's gonna be here 10 years down the road, because it is a financial commitment. And that's just an initial financial commitment to get things started. We wanna make sure it's an investment in the future of the kids and in the future of the program, not just an investment in equipment that's gonna sit out in a storage shed for a long time, in a couple of years. So that would be my recommendation to the board, would be to, let's start working and forming that partnership with the city. How can we get more engaged in working with the youth programs? And is that something where, hey, we need to have some clinics and have some camps next spring? Getting those elementary kids, hey, let's go play softball, let's get things going. I feel like the timing is starting to come together with what the city's trying to do, with the club interest and the programs that are there. But it's big girl softball when you get into high school, and to be competitive and to get excitement. I feel like we need some things in place.
Mindy?
Well, I have a whole list of questions, but I will not ask all of them. So let's say we do go 26-27 season and we suit a JV team. How long can we suit a JV team before we have to move to the varsity level? I guess that's my question.
Well, that's where we start to get some things, right? If let's just say we have 12 girls of our own, we have 2 or 3 girls that come from around. If we field a JV program, those students that are currently going to Brush would have to come play at Fort Morgan. If that student is a junior or senior, they're gonna wanna spend their junior and senior year on a JV program. Are we gonna be competitive at the varsity level? Depending upon the league that we get in, that level of competitiveness might change a little bit. Are there ways to schedule, a handful of games against teams more at our level in a competitive league? Absolutely. That's where it becomes my job to make sure that we find competitive games. There's not really a time frame when that happens, but it's for 2 years. So if we choose to play a JV in 26-27, we're locked into that cycle, which would be that following year. Once that new cycle began, then we'd have the opportunity to play a varsity schedule and to compete for the postseason. So whatever we did next year, we'll be locked into for 2 years.
How soon would we not have to make that determination?
As to where we want to play,
Well,
Or-
if we, as an example, we have some pretty competitive teams that I think could probably compete at a varsity level, even though they may be younger players, because they're pretty competitive now.
Yep.
And so I'm just curious, when do we have to make that determination to, we set a varsity and a JV, and we get that
Yep.
interest in there?
that would be good to know by next February when we apply to start the program with Jessup. We would have to apply for sub-varsity or varsity competition, and then again, whichever league we try to, it'll make it a lot easier to get into a league if we're playing varsity, sub-varsity games for sure. Like I said, the balance then becomes who can we schedule to find competitive games that balances out, the Eatons and the universities and the Brushes and those tougher teams that we might play. And it would become a challenge to, within the region, find those teams that we need to play. So, next February though would be kind of that hard deadline.
Sorry.
No, you're
Cut you off.
Do you know much about the survey that was sent out? Like, who was it sent to as far as like grade level?
I can answer that. So it was sent to all 11th, 10th, or I guess it would be current 12th grade, 11th grade, 10th grade, 9th grade, 8th grade students. And so we had their group emails, and then there was And so students basically were you be interested in softball, what other sports you compete in, you know, that was majority of what, and then what years of experience, and that's where I got the number like 50, I think like 57% haven't played softball before. There was, each class had a breakdown of, and I think that was sent to y'all, a breakdown of each grade level of what was girls interested. Now, in that, there's potential for girls that are currently playing other sports in the fall that they would have to choose. They would have to pick, you know, volleyball or softball, or cheerleading or softball, or, you know, or cross country. And so they would have to figure out and weigh that and make that choice.
So just sent out to students,
Was it sent out
not
to,
parents.
It was not sent to parents, it was just sent to students.
sorry, was it just sent to their student emails?
Yes, it was
Okay.
sent.
That's what I was curious about, because I also know how, well, I mean, a little sarcasm in there about how well students actually read the emails, let alone respond to them. So I'm actually impressed that we did get that number then.
I will say this, there's certain times kids will check and respond, like, for example, when we do homecoming, king, queen, royalty, they check their email, you know, they check and they respond. So I mean, like, they don't always respond, but they definitely, for certain things, they definitely make sure to look for it.
So back to the Title IX and the equal facilities, would Legion Field be the girls softball anticipated home field, or where would the home field be?
I would anticipate using Riverside Park. The main baseball field at Legion is just a whole different animal when it comes to dimensions. You know, your softball fields are much shorter. Removing the mound is an undertaking, and rebuilding that mound every year is an undertaking. So I would recommend that we would approach the city and try to make Riverside part of that field that we would use for softball.
Do we know if that's a current guideline in our MOU that we currently have with the city? Is it?
I'm pretty sure the city would be fine with us doing that, we just need to have a conversation with them.
And how long would having that conversation, and then how long would it take to get that implemented? Like, I mean, do we have to go to city council? Do we have to, what do you have to do?
It's part of the MOU,
I'm
the
guessing
last
it's-
time, I was, as a former city council member in school district, I've looked at the MOU a lot of times. It was part of it back, I don't know, 4 years ago. I imagine it's probably still part of that. There's not as much usage of facilities, between the city and the school district since the field house has been built and, you know, other things that their soccer field and stuff, so. But I would imagine it would be something that we could work with them on and they would be happy to accommodate. I don't know what programming they do. I know flag football used to be held there in the fall, but they've since moved that to the turf field over by the field house. So I do not believe there's a lot of programming going on for those fields other than some adult softball leagues in the summer, but I don't know what.
I was gonna say, the rec league that started, they do not start until like August 2nd, and they go through the end of August, and they will be utilizing those fields. And there's, let's see, 5 to 8, 9 to 10, and 11 to 13 age range. And I did talk to them today, and they said their numbers are very high at 5 to 8, but not very great at 9 to 10 and 11 to 13. But it's because kids are having to make choices on what they're gonna play.
My comments are, I was surprised this was already an action item, just because I feel like there are so many things that weren't answered yet. But I'm on the same train as Mr. Edson, and we got a solid plan. Can't wait to know.
Amy? John, you seem to have like some insight with players and seem to know a little bit more about who would be making up the team, just with your network. Do you happen to know like a list of players in the community in Fort Morgan that like would definitely play, and what positions they play and all of that? Like, what would make up our team?
I don't know that I have specific players, but I do know that I feel like we would have enough to team, and it would probably be a good team. You know, everybody coming together and team cohesion, the right coaches, and there's a number of different aspects that go into that as investment group. But I think that we definitely have the numbers. My understanding in talking to some of the coaches last time with the Habit coaches, they actually turned away 60 girls for tryouts. That ended up, and those girls went to the Wiggins Leagues just so that they could play. So they had, and they've got 36 girls right now filling out teams from 10 to 14 year old. So there's an older girls team, and I'd have to find out some additional information and get you some more numbers on that. But I agree with, you know, what Mr. Edson was saying, that really at this late point in everything, it makes sense to look at the 26-27 season, so that we had time to really lay this groundwork and do it right and not just throw it out.
Same question, except coaching. Have you had anybody approach you about signing up to be a varsity coach?
No, I don't think that we've gotten that far yet, because they're really looking at, you know, are we gonna have a program? But I know in speaking with, you know, like last year, speaking with that there were teachers in our school district that played college softball as well. So I think that they're, as far as getting, because you played doesn't mean you're a good coach. And certainly you can find a coach that's never played softball that knows the game. So I think it's just one of those we have to, that's one of the things that I think for Mr. Edson to go find out is the coaching up there. And can we start moving forward with this and gathering that information so that we're, when we hit that time frame, we're going to go and
I'm gonna address again, it's a question, why is it an action item? For me, it's a placeholder, and what it is, it gives us direction. We vote on whatever we vote on it, whether it's to table it, or whether to bring it back in January, or pick a date, December, for after we've gathered more information, whether it's you say, hey, I'm fine with it right now, let's vote on it and move ahead, or whether it's, hey, no, we're not doing this, and then that sends a message to our community, we're not pursuing softball anymore. Whereas the other options are, we're still pursuing it, we're just going to go around it a little bit differently, or we're pursuing it, we're going to start it now. So that's why that's there.
Any further questions, discussion? Y'all go sit down now.
Surprise.
All right, we will move on to discussion item E, the 25-26 school handbooks. Elementary level and the GT and so forth. I'm assuming middle school and high school will be at our next board meeting in July.
Middle school and Lincoln will be at our next meeting, and typically the high school does theirs right in our August meeting because they have so much information.
We're in the process of going through it. If you'd like it in July, I can get it to you by July.
Well, I'm not saying that, I'm just making sure that I'm clear. I would never tell you what to do.
Okay.
Okay. Any questions about that? All right, moving on. Third reading, district policy revision, policy GDKA, length of support staff workday. Any questions? Discussion. Okay, hearing none, moving on to consent agenda. Pleasure of the board.
Move to approve.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Chris Brown,
Aye.
Amy Grantham,
Aye.
Nancy Hopper,
Aye.
Katie Jess,
Aye.
John Powdy,
Aye.
Mindy Smith, Sarah Whitney.
Okay, action items. A, appropriating resolution to adopt the 25-26 budget. Pleasure of the board.
Move to approve. Second.
Roll call, please.
I'm sorry, it takes me a moment to write letters.
Oh, you're fine.
Nancy Hopper,
Yes.
Katie Jess, John Powdy,
Aye.
Mindy Smith, Sarah Whitney.
Action item B, resolution to approve spending the the funds from the beginning fund balance. Pleasure of the board.
Move to approve.
Second.
Roll call, please. I'll do it this way. Roll call.
Chris Brown,
Aye.
Amy Grantham,
Aye.
Nancy Hopper,
Aye.
Katie Jess,
Aye.
John Gotti,
Aye.
Cindy Smith, Sarah Whitney.
Okay, item D, item C, the audit firm DMC Auditing and Consulting LLC. Pleasure of the board.
Move to approve.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Chris Brown,
Aye.
Amy Grantham,
Aye.
Nancy Hopper,
Aye.
Katie Jess,
Aye.
John Gotti,
Aye.
Cindy Smith, Sarah Whitney.
Item D, Lincoln High School actual and planned measures as an alternative education campus. Pleasure of the board.
Move to approve. Second.
Roll call, please.
Chris Brown,
Aye.
Amy Grantham,
Aye.
Nancy Hopper,
Aye.
Katie Jess,
Aye.
John Gotti,
Aye.
Cindy Smith, Sarah Whitney.
Next on the agenda, E, Fort Morgan High School Girls Softball Program. Pleasure of the board.
So I make a motion to continue considering offering girls softball for fall 26 season. The board will study and gather information in order to make a decision in November of this year.
Is there a second?
Second.
Could we add one thing to that, having a report back to the board with data prior to that date, so that we have more information and can make an informed decision?
Absolutely, I think that would be the intent of the motion, that we gather information so that we can make a logical and fiscal responsible decision as to whether or not we're going to move forward. So I do believe that is the intent, will be apprised as we continue to study. If I am wrong in that, someone needs to tell me. Hearing none, we're good. Roll call. Oh, I need a second.
Second.
And roll call. Y'all.
Chris Brown,
Aye.
Amy Grantham,
Aye.
Nancy Hopper,
Aye.
Katie Jess,
Aye.
John Gotti,
Aye.
Cindy Smith, Sarah Whitney.
F, 25, 26, school handbooks. Pleasure of the board.
Move to approve.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Chris Brown,
Aye.
Amy Grantham,
Aye.
Nancy Hopper,
Aye.
Katie Jess,
Aye.
John Gotti,
Aye.
Cindy Smith, Sarah Whitney.
G, third reading, district policy revision, policy GDKA, length of support staff workday. Pleasure of the board.
Move to approve.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Chris Brown,
Aye.
Amy Grantham,
Aye.
Nancy Hopper,
Aye.
Katie Jess,
Aye.
John Gotti,
Aye.
Cindy Smith, Sarah Whitney.
H, donation from the Blodorn Foundation to the Children's Center. Pleasure of the board.
Move to approve. Second.
Roll call, please.
Chris Brown,
Aye.
Amy Grantham,
Aye.
Nancy Hopper,
Aye.
Katie Jess,
Aye.
John Gotti,
Aye.
Cindy Smith, Sarah Whitney.
I, Fort Morgan High School Future Farmers of America Officers Overnight Retreat in Estes Park on August 9th through the 10th, 2025. Pleasure of the board.
Move to approve. Second.
Roll call, please.
Chris Brown,
Aye.
Amy Grantham,
Aye.
Nancy Hopper,
Aye.
Katie Jess,
Aye.
John Gotti,
Aye.
Cindy Smith, Sarah Whitney.
Next, we have advanced planning. The next Board of Education meeting will be July 14th, 2025. And if there is no further business to come before the board, we are adjourned at 7:59.